Good morning, everyone. So it's 9 o'clock, so we're ready to get started. Just a couple of quick things before we have our keynote speaker. So you are sitting in track 1. I know it's confusing because it's ballroom number 3, but the numbers are reversed, right? So if you go 1 over, you're in track 2. That's also ballroom 2, right? That's the way math works. And if you go to the far ballroom, that is track number 3, but ballroom 1. Right? In terms of other things, all the talks are up here this year. And downstairs, 1 level, in multi-purpose room A, you will find competitions, and you will find just where you can have lunch, and you can kind of generally hang out there. Over across the hall in multi-purpose B, you will find our sponsors and also lockpicking and harbor hocking. So that's where all that is. And speaking of competitions, the competitions all start at 10 except for the OSINT competition. The OSINT competition will start at noon and you have to register for it. So go downstairs between 10 and noon and register for that competition if you want to participate. That competition runs from noon till 3. If you've never done an open source intelligence competition before, I recommend you try it. It's very low tech, and it's a lot of fun. And you get to do creepy things like investigate people and find out all about them. Right? And so we have that. Other quick announcements. We have a talk here in this room at 2 o'clock. It says on your schedule TBA. That talk will be given by a representative from the FBI. So just letting you know that's what that talk is about. And the after party will be here in the Kerr Union from 6 to 9 tonight. We'll have dual core performing again this year, and also we'll have DJ Hayes with him as well.
Where in the building?
Here. Like here, out there. That's where. So, all right. With that said, I want to introduce our keynote speaker. We have our keynote is Alexander Muentz from the Leviathan Security Group, and he's up here from Philly. Some of you may know him already. Just a real quick story about BloomCon and how it's named. I don't know if Alex knows this, but Alex puts on a little conference, what would you call it, a loose gathering of 40 to 50 miscreants or something like that?
That's the nicer way of saying it.
Yeah. A very long-standing gathering of miscreants. So they've been going on doing that, I think, longer than DEF CON's been going on.
DEF CON's 1 year old.
Okay, so 1 year less than DEF CON. But that is called PumpCon, which happens around Pumpkin Day in the fall in Philly. And so BloomCon is partially named for Bloomsburg University, and it's also named for the springtime. So this is the springtime conference that we have when things are in bloom. So it's kind of the companion to PumpCon, which you didn't even know that. But now everybody knows the secret to the naming of our conference. So Alex.
First off, I'd like to, I realize it's not great to start a talk with an apology, but normally if you've caught my talks before, it's usually something having to do with the law, or something doing with, I've done some talks on embedded systems, or basic, like here's how to get into hacking. This is a conceptual talk, which I've given them before. Sometimes they're really good. I want to kind of explore something that I've been thinking about, and since Professor Polster gave me the keynote and said, do whatever you want, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with something conceptual. So, who am I? I'm a lawyer and a cybersecurity professional. Neither of those are in quotes now. I'm a senior security advisor at Leviathan Security Group, which means that my job is to go and improve security programs. If your company is like, wow, we're horribly immature, help. Or did the pen testers go through and stomp everything in your network? Maybe if you talked to me, I could have helped prevent that. It's not one thing that's wrong, it's the way you're thinking about this. So a lot of what I do is more conceptual. So disclaimer, while I am a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer. So none of this should be constituted as legal advice. Really, none of this is legal advice. I'm not speaking on behalf of my employer, my clients, the community at large. Don't dox me any more than I already have been if I say something you disagree with. So, that said, I've been wrong before. I'm on record of saying, I think my best dumb thing I've said was, who in their right mind is going to pay Apple money to download television shows? And I believe I said something about, like, cocaine must be very inexpensive in Cupertino. Thinking like, wow, that's almost as dumb as my statement was a couple years before that was, I think Linux is a fad. When you want to do real work, you'll use something like Oracle on Solaris. Clearly, I'm wrong. I can be wrong. When I'm wrong, I'm big. So that's the chunk of the salt lick you should take with this talk. So who are we, right? Are we hackers? Are we criminals? Are we pranksters? Are we industry professionals? Straight line tie? Are we warriors? And looking at the news today, all these are potential arguments we can make about who we are. And some of you will resonate with one of those statements more than others, right? If you went to school to learn pen testing because you want to go work for the DoD or another three-letter agency, you want to collect challenge coins, you want to be a warrior for your country, right? There's now a cyber command. There's been a cyber command for some time. But like, that's an actual, like, you can get medals for, toning stuff, right? There are some of us who resonate to the idea of, I'm a prankster, right? Well, some of you giggled about dropping docs. Sometimes that's very much fun. And I remember I gave a talk at a law school, and I was trying to explain hacker sensibilities and hacker senses of humor. And this woman's kind of giggling, like, you consider it fun, like, look, I'm friends with someone who is on record as being the first person who swatted somebody. Swatted Wynn Schwartau in the 90s. And he's like, oh, that's funny. I'm like, no, it's terrifying. It's funny when you're not the person getting swatted. But that resonates with us, right? Criminals. Some of us are criminals. And I'm not talking about, like, the straight up, I start my day as a criminal, I'm a carder, I'm a professional malware writer. Sometimes we do criminal things because reasons. Okay. Okay, so those voices aren't just in my head. Good. Just making sure. Otherwise, just stay with it, Alex. You're going to be okay. And hackers, that's a term. And some people embrace it. In our community, we embrace it, but I find you drop the H word outside of certain spaces, it gets really weird. So, where am I rambling? I'm going to ramble a bit more about the idea of narrative. And my favorite quote from a great philosopher, Carol from The Walking Dead, because children like stories. So, story time. The idea is this. We have narratives. We have imperfect shortcuts. We talk about a complicated ball of facts, right? Like the hacker community and the information security industry. That's a big, hairy mess of stuff. We shortcut that to a Guy Fawkes mask and someone holding, Dell SecureWorks stock, right? We just boil that down. Why? Because it's really hard to have all the facts in your head. You want to be able to boil it down to an elevator pitch, to a tweet, to something you can sum up this really quickly. There's nothing wrong with narratives, but recognize they rule us. Okay. Our interpretation of those facts, we boil it down into a narrative. We boil down the anarchic, think of like the worst thing you've seen on 4chan. And you recognize that that's how maybe many other people, like Fox News is going to show that thing vomited up out of 4chan, some of it pixelated out, as the hacker community did this. You're like, and part of you is laughing, and a part of you is like, I have to explain that to my mother now. I mean, we've all had that moment, right? Having a young coworker go, why are you giggling at the word goatsy? And I'm like, don't look it up. Just don't. Just the old hacker bad thing on the internet. And then they look it up and they're like, why didn't you stop me? I'm like, how? I can't filter it. Not that I would. But our interpretation of new facts is affected by our previous beliefs. Some of you think, and I'm punting this one out there. Some of you might have a belief that the U.S. government's operations in cyber warfare are evil. Okay, that's you can come up with that. That might be you can come up. You can. There's a bunch of arguments you can make around that. So then a new revelation, like Vault 7 drops, and it's just those of you who are on that side are like, yeah, more proof that they're evil, even though they had memes in their code repositories and the documentation about stuff. And you realize that me reading it's like, wow, they're the same as us, because these are the same complaints I see when I see, people arguing like, why can't I slap someone via git commit? Some of you haven't yet wanted to slap someone via, why did you commit this code? I just want to smack you. What's the flag for that? So we interpret new facts based on our core beliefs. And it's really hard to move us out of that. It's really hard to move you from your position because you've already accepted that narrative. And presented facts. You base your ideas about what facts you've seen, not all the facts on the ground. If you haven't researched it, you might be able to continue going on ignorant as you like. And that's okay, because you can't know everything. Even if, you start with Wikipedia, and the problem with Wikipedia is you start with researching one thing, and next thing you know, I'm reading about, like, medieval Serbia. I don't know why it happens, but it always happens. Like, I wanted to look up something in ISO, went to Wikipedia. Did you know that, Greater Serbia went all the way to here? And my coworker's like, don't make me go into Wikipedia, because I will end up looking about, like, early manufacturers of linoleum. So, let's talk about narratives about us, right? Is this a community or an industry? And depends where you are and depends what con you're at, that flips both ways, right? Go to Black Hat and you see industry, because you see money getting made, or at least it looks like money's getting made. And every time I go to a con like that, I'm like, why am I not making more? Because you see some sales rep from FireEye or Dell SecureWorks and going, they have a much nicer car than I do. Huh, right? So it's an industry, man. People are getting rich and not me. Then you go to something like Hope, and you think, wow, a bunch of dirty hippies all talking about writing code, and I'm one of those dirty hippies. I'm like, yeah, we're all cool. You can crash in my couch. And many of them do, since, as Professor Polster pointed out, I run BloomCon, which means the after party is at my house. So many attendees end up next morning like, hey, dude, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. But so it's a community, right? I have friends online. I can go crash with them. I can go trust them. I trust them in my house. They trust me in theirs. We're all big, happy family. And either way you believe that, you're going to kind of continue believing that. Are we, in our roles, whatever that role may be within information security or cybersecurity, the hacker community, do we support existing hierarchies? Do you uphold the status quo? Do you play defense? Do you keep, if you do InfoSec for Bank of America, are you upholding their power as being one of the largest banks in the world? Not saying it's wrong, just saying, what is your role in this? Are you, instead, the outsider looking for windows because you've got a lot of bricks? What do we believe about ourselves? Do we believe that we're the brick throwers, or do we believe that we are defending all that is good and right and honest? And why I'm going with this is your beliefs about who you are and the community base how you're going to assume and you're going to look at any new fact that comes in. So finally, what do other people who aren't here, go to the diner in the morning? I tried to have a conversation, but I had no coffee, so all I could really say was, please give me coffee. But I have these conversations with people who aren't in the community and go, when I say, oh, I'm a hacker, because I realize that if I say I'm a hacker, it's not the immediate distaste I'll get if I say I'm a lawyer from Philadelphia. That's an instant, wow, you must be a schmuck. But if I say instead I'm a hacker, oh, wow, scary, I'm not going to show you my credit card. It's honest graft pays me more than your credit cards, ma'am. But on the other side, how do regular people view us? When you say that to a complete stranger, do they recoil in fear? Do they start asking questions? And I find that it's more often than not, they're more curious. What do you do all day? And I realize that I'll tell stories about doing physical pen tests. I'll do stories about interviewing people and tricking people, because those are the fun ones, not started Qualys and then started browsing Imgur. Built 3 hours. Dumped a bunch of stuff off. Yes, these are all your high bones. You should fix that. And wow, that cat's eating a watermelon. But what do people believe about us, right? How are they going to perceive when we start talking? When we identify ourselves as, I'm not just J random person, I do cybersecurity for a freaking living. I eat, sleep, and breathe this. This is important to me. So, common narratives. I are a cyber criminal. I am such a cyber criminal. I wear a balaclava. I wear a ski mask while I'm doing computery stuff. And I realize this is clip art. It's so cliched. But thinking of, I also do have tape over my webcam. So maybe I should be also wearing a ski mask. But, right, normal people think, oh, you're trying to steal my credit cards. And when I say things like, I am familiar with Rescator and the Russian Carter markets, I had logins because I would watch them just to see, how are they figuring this out? How are they validating cards? And this was when I was working for a consulting firm in the financial services industry. It's helpful to have a login on that just to watch it, right? I remember when the Target breach happened and getting an inkling that something had happened because all of a sudden prices dropped for American cards. I'm like, something just happened, right? These dumps are really, really good. And then I'm getting all curious, and then a coworker's like, oh yeah, Target got popped. I'm like, I think I know where some of the cards are, right? But I talked to someone who's not in the industry, and they're like, why are you there? Well, it's not really my job. I wasn't paid to do it. I'm curious, right? Another narrative, this guy. We don't forget, we don't forgive, we are legion, expect us. And they keep adding stuff to it to make it longer and more wordy. But the idea of like an anarchic, we do things for either for great justice or for the lulz or screw that guy, whatever. But it's a belief if we believe it about ourselves, or if we let other people believe it, it's funny, it's interesting. We're not trying to steal your credit cards. Or if we do steal your credit cards, it's to make, it's to make something funny happen when you try to run the card next time. You're like, I've never seen that, A friend of mine keeps on trying to make this happen. He's like, what? Make the credit card receipt read like lol dongs. And it's like, you spent more time, and he's got multiple card readers in his house. I'm like, you could do something more productive with your time. But if you get somewhere, show me the results, because I would love to see that. Right? Are we spies? Right? Are we helping or preventing the national security apparatus of one country do what they do? Some of you may. Some of you may end up doing that. And do you see that as your role? Do other people see that? Do other people look at seasoned cybersecurity people and go, you are potentially useful to me, either as a fellow spy, a fellow cyber warrior, or as a potential adversary? Doesn't matter do we believe it as well. It kind of does, but they may view it as that, too. And finally, are we cybersecurity professionals? And that was the only image I could come up for a cybersecurity professional that didn't actually show what we actually look like, which would be, a little tubby, black t-shirt, bags under the eyes, scrolling through Imgur while billing something else. But do we believe that about ourselves? Do we believe we're just consultants, are just people checking boxes for that HIPAA or PCI audit to go through so the company can go through another quarter of doing whatever they do? Okay, I've been rambling on. Why is this important? In case you've been living under a rock, all of a sudden we are actually important, right? I remember after Target, like, oh, wow, a piece of news from my industry hit national news. Like, I heard it on NPR. My wife goes, oh, that Target thing that you've been talking about, it's on the news. Now, every day, there is a story about something in our community industry on regular news, right? I wake up, I listen to NPR, and I hear Brian Krebs. I hear like, oh yeah, I heard that story. And it's like, when it hits mainstream news about stuff that we know about, stuff that we think about and worry about, it means that the rest of the world is paying attention to us. As an industry, the cybersecurity market is growing, right? Those of you who have what I call adult Facebook, aka LinkedIn, how many requests from recruiters do you have to apply for a position a week? I'm at like 4 to 6, right? It's great to be in this industry. On the flip side, though, it means that we're viewed as expensive, we're viewed as temperamental, we're viewed as a lot of things. But the market's booming. There's money to be made here. There are people coming into this market who's like, hey, I heard there's money here. We're relevant to politics. Do you know how strange it is to be asked my political views on whether or not the Russians influenced the election? I'm like, wow, like this is like a conversation in a bar. Like, this is not the conversation I expected to have tonight. But we are relevant in international relations. All of a sudden, someone who can write really good exploits is important. It's worth votes. It's worth the attention. There are stories about us, right? Mr. Robot, there's got to be a CSI about, what. I don't watch those shows because I'm annoyed whenever it's like, I've written the firewall to deconfigure all the malware. And I'm like, make the noise stop. This filter makes all the malware, makes all the bad code turn red. Like, what is this? If I had that, I would just find that last bracket I'm missing. Right? I don't care about oh, this is bad code. Like, can it just find the missing bracket? Can it find that bastard who put a semicolon in the wrong spot? That's what I want. Because I wrote this when I was distracted or tired or whatever. So there are stories about us. And some are really hyped. Some are fairly straightforward. But we're folk heroes, folk devils, heroes, villains, something. We're relevant. Like, I'm afraid that, we had, I remember in the 80s and the 90s, you had stories about young doctors doing great work, and then young lawyers, hot, sexy lawyers doing great work. I'm kind of dreading the next show where it's like, hot, sexy cybersecurity professionals doing great work, because it will not look like any of us. I'm sorry. I mean, not even in my fantasies. But there are stories about us. We're grist for the mill. Okay, still rambling. Where am I going with this? This attention isn't harmless, right? We are, our very outlook on life is sometimes simplistic. Sometimes our sense of humor is offensive. 4chan, 9gag, Reddit, the jokes we make amongst ourselves. And I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying the level of attention on us is potentially risky. The example I'm going to give is the Mirai botnet, right? One of our clients, not one of my shop's clients, a friend's shop's clients, got nuked by it. And I remember the lines where Akamai went, I'm out. Akamai, we can stop any DDoS. Yeah, no. We fell over. Okay. That was 3 or 4 people who came up and went, most DVRs, our video cameras online, have crappy security. And I knew that, and of course I didn't have the big picture to think, because I remember reverse engineering DVRs a couple of years ago and going, many of them have done things like active telnet ports with hard-coded credentials. And I thought, you could use this to erase the evidence on it, not, oh my God, there are millions of these things. I can just write a bot, and I have the biggest botnet ever. And the problem is that botnet you can't really pull out of because there's no real good way of pulling software out of these things. It's not like you have AV running on your $200 cheap-ass DVR. So I didn't see that part. But someone did, and they wrote a botnet that had nation-state capabilities. They could take a hardened website, a site that has their CDN across an Akamai or Prolexic and go, gone. Next step, they could take a small country offline. They could do a bronze night and go, sorry, I'm going to DDoS important systems and take you back to 1970. That's 4 people. Imagine that capability of wait a minute. We were just hacking around and we have superpowers. Didn't get bitten by a radioactive spider. We just found a hole, exploited it, and we have too much power now. Because nation-state capabilities result in nation-state attention. You and 3 of your friends sitting around, drinking beer, coming up with that and go, oh dear, I now have capabilities that People's Liberation Army or the U.S. National Security Agency would like to have. And I imagine negotiating with them is not like negotiating hey, I found a bug in your software, do you have a bug bounty? This is more like, we would like the information, and we're not going to ask nicely. So we get this attention. We have capability that is outsized for our ability to handle it. Now, all this attention, we're not the ones doing the talking. Very few people inside the community are getting the press to be able to say, let me explain how this works. Let me explain what the scope of this is. Because I'm thinking when I listen to NPR, and NPR is my judge for what are regular people listening to. It's government, it's Michael Hayden, it's Brian Krebs, it's other people, not people in so much the industry who are able to say and explain in a 30-second or 60-second soundbite, this is why this is important, this is what it means. And when you have other people talking about this stuff, they're going to use their own agendas are going to come out, right? An honest assessment about who dumped the DNC's emails gets covered by what you want the American public to believe afterwards, right? It's less about you had weak security and maybe you should have thought about that. That's my concern. Did it maybe affect the election? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not going to state that. But if you have an agenda, you're going to use that fact for your agenda. My agenda is I would like people to take security more seriously, right? Straight up. Simple one. I have no particular axe to grind politically, but because we're letting other people speak for us, we're letting their agendas come through, not ours. This will affect us. Because security is important all of a sudden, it will affect us because it affects our industry, it affects how we are viewed, and I don't think it will be necessarily beneficial. Okay, I'm halfway done. What we do is important to outsiders in a way that it wasn't 5 years ago. Outsiders don't understand, right? We eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. Right? Like, I imagine half the people in the room, if I just say a few letters together, letters and numbers together, you know the rest of the statement. MS-067. Right? You know, I imagine half of you can explain exactly what that vuln is. And outsiders, their eyes will glaze over. What's the importance of it to the accountant in your company? You're not going to go into net API, you're not going to go into remote code execution, you instead want to be able to say, like, this allows your computer to be somebody else's. And this is what it could mean, right? But they're interested. They want, because they don't care necessarily about the vulnerability, they care about how it affects the organization that you both share, how it affects them. And we're failing to do good outreach. When we try to talk to non-technical people, we often get shrill, we get excited, which is our nature, because someone's paying attention to us that isn't one of us, but we sometimes screw this up. And my observation here is better stories get their stories repeated. Going back to Carol from The Walking Dead, children like stories. Most people, when it comes to this, like a story. The good stories get repeated over and over again, even if they're lies, even if they're wrong. Because we sound like three people hanging around a comic book store arguing who could win in a fight, Spider-Man or Batman. Because we already know Superman and Batman. Like, there's a movie about that stuff now, so it's canonical. But we don't argue this stuff well. We don't present this stuff well to the outside world. So, outreach. When you get an opportunity, understand the audience. Whether it's the media, you get a time on television, you get a time talking to a reporter, or it's your own family. Recognize, try to figure out what their issue is, what their actual, I want to know this because it affects me, and explain it in terms they get. You can kind of teach them a little bit about stuff, but really it's, because no one cares. I liken this to the, the kind of refrigerant in your refrigerator. Is it R134A? And most people's response is, it keeps the cold stuff cold. I think it's a Samsung. And that's the relationship most people have with technology. I don't care about my fridge until I drink warm beer. And then life sucks. Right? That's how most people view technology. I want the thing to work. I don't want you to bother me about antivirus, or DLP, or whitelisting applications, until I've been owned. And I still don't care about it, I just want it to go away. So you have to understand your audience when you're talking to them and go, let me break this into terms you can understand that are directly focused on your interest in why. And when you talk to them, you can be helpful or you can be cool. Way too many of us, me included, want to be cool. Because someone's paying attention to us. The number of times I've said and done things that have been stupid because it sounded cool, I need to learn to not do that. When you're talking to the media, when you're talking to family, coworkers outside of your silo, be helpful, even when it's painful, even when it seems they're more dense than a block of wood. It's still, you have to explain, so we have to be better ambassadors for what we do. Know your story, and know the reason for it. Why are you saying this? Why are you trying to educate this person? What does the end result look like? They have better knowledge about this. You've been a useful ambassador. You haven't been super lead hacksaw. Because that's fun, but it makes you look like an idiot. You lost the argument even though you're cool. So why I've been going with this is, I think there's a couple trends happening. And I realized, going back to my original statement, which was I've been wrong before, but I see this as I've been in this industry for going on 10 years, what trends are going to affect us, and we should be able to talk about, because there are waves coming in, if we like it or not. First is, there's always the fear of regulation. Government will come in because that will solve this problem, whatever that problem may be. Right? IoT. Well, we may have to have like a UL for IoT, underwriters laboratories. You can't plug this into a public network unless it meets these standards. Otherwise, your ISP will cut you off. Okay? Maybe we can withdraw something from sale because it is unsafe. Maybe we can shut down a website because it doesn't hold data correctly. Right? Some kind of minimum standards. And some of you might go, that's not a bad idea. Others of you may rebel against that. Like, well, what if I want my Telnet-enabled root and enter system? I just like to fly like that, yo. Because, sorry, I'm getting distracted here, but the problem is that other people may try to solve this problem before we do. If we don't solve this problem, other people will, and they will use the tools that they have. Maybe there will be liability for bad security. You can get sued. You can get fined. Maybe they can shut you off. It may be imposed on us. Right? We may adopt some kind of regulation on us to prevent someone else from doing it to us. Licensure. Go from a certified ethical hacker to a licensed ethical hacker. I have to have this state license to be a pen tester. Because I'm trying to think, there's, what is it, North Carolina requires you to have a private investigator's license to do forensics. That might happen elsewhere. That may happen where you have to have some state license to be a authorized pen tester, and we won't accept non-authorized pen testers. We may adopt that as an industry standard just to prevent bad outcomes. Right? We want to protect our own industry. We may adopt this anyway. So other trends we might have to prepare for. elimination. We may lose an industry because we have been ineffective in preventing the harms that we're trying to prevent, right? The example I'm going to give is physical security. Anyone here ever have their car broken into while it was parked in a parking lot? Okay. Do you still park your car in parking lots? Yes. You've accepted that was a risk. Someone may break into your car, steal your stuff, and break your window. You may just accept that as a risk. You may accept that, we may accept that breaches occur. Oh well, I got another breach notification letter. Yay. And that what we attempt to do for security is too much. It's too restrictive. Breaches are going to happen whether or not you put in DLP, install an IDS, adopt a NIST 800-53 aligned security program, all the kind of recommendations we make. Breach is going to happen anyway. If they want it, they're going to get it. So therefore, we don't need you. We'll demote the CISO, and we're done. Right? It's too expensive to keep you around. The breach is going to happen nonetheless. Maybe we'll just insure it. Nope. We could spend $1 million a year for a security program with all this stuff and these staff and this, this blinking light box and all that, or we can spend $100,000 a year for insurance. Good enough. We'll write a check to Hiscox or MetLife, and we're done. That's cheaper. Maybe just accept it. Just go on. Yep, that happened. What? Cost of doing business. Cost of doing business with your healthcare providers. Occasionally that weird rash you have ends up on 4chan with a meme attached to it. It's like, instead of I can have cheeseburgers, I can have itch cream. Maybe there's backlash against us, right? Those of you who adopted the hacker word, all of a sudden that becomes the red mark, that becomes a mark of Cain on you, right? You go and you've, especially if you've decided to really adopt the persona, right? You go nowhere without your black t-shirt, combat boots, and that 1,000-yard stare. And you're like, yeah, I'm a hacker, what of it? Well, maybe there's backlash, maybe you don't get employed. That's a possible risk for us if we don't do these things. If we don't kind of think about public relations, we don't think about how we present. Maybe that results in stiffer penalties for us when we do things wrong, right? My typical rant is Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It's vague, it's broad, and many things I've done as a pen tester maybe get a little wiggly. Like, anyone here doing a pen test ever go out of scope inadvertently? Right? I've done it, where I didn't realize that a chunk of the scope that I was given by the company I'm pen testing was actually Rackspace. We didn't get permission from Rackspace. And I owned a box there. And went, wait a minute. Why is there other stuff in this box? Oh boy, it's a virtual server. And I owned, like, oops. Have to call Rackspace and go, like, I'm really, really sorry. The IP list I had that the company gave me included your stuff, and I assumed that they knew what IP space they had. Well, maybe that goes from being thanks for telling me, yeah, that was stupid of you, to, can you just wait right there for 10, 15 minutes while the police show up? Like, that's a possibility. We might get so disliked that we're treated more like criminals, and that's a risk. Maybe it's stiffer penalties for just being us, right? The Andrew Arnheimer, Weave, right, who ran a script to iterate across AT&T's website to identify new iPad owners, right? That a pen tester could have done that and been able to say, look, I was doing this as a voluntary action, and I'm trying to make security better. Maybe we won't take such a light view of that. Maybe that will be criminalized. Maybe just by association. What if we turned 20, think of how law enforcement can sometimes view groups as organized crime groups, right? What if we equated 2,600 showing up at 2,600 meetings is equivalent of being a juggalo? I apologize if any of you are juggalos. I'm sorry. But, right, like, think of the idea is like, well, some of you are known criminals, and therefore we're just going to consider you all an organized crime group. That's a scary possibility. Like, there's going to be, because we're in focus, there may be some attempt to view even countercultural imagery as a sign that you are not an upstanding member of society. So here's my call to action. Understand how outsiders view us. And be a positive model. Still keep rocking with the blue hair and the weird piercings and the crazy stuff we say and the memes. God knows everyone loves cat memes. But recognize that because we're in focus, we have to be viewed as a net positive. Talk to people outside of our bubble, right? Talk to users, God forbid, right? And explain things, and explain in a way they can understand why what you do you think is important to them. Listen to people outside of our bubble. Do you ever have a conversation where you're trying to convince someone who isn't technically savvy how to use PGP? It's hard, but you're passionate, like, damn it, you just should use it. It's like, well, wait a minute. Why is it difficult for that ordinary person to use it? Because it's complicated. And maybe you'll get the idea of like, why they view us to be a pain in the ass, or criminals, or wrong, or whatever. But it helps. It helps us both make a bridge. So that way, when they're thinking about us, they don't think of us as that pain in the ass or that evil person. It's like, hey, you're trying to do a thing, and you're just somewhat inarticulate about it. Offer time to community groups, not, out in the outside. Journalists, be willing to explain things, right? Many times they want to understand this, but they want to take your 20-minute explanation and boil it down into 3 sentences, or sometimes 3 words. Be careful with your language then, because if it can be misinterpreted, it will be misinterpreted. When you talk to community groups, reach out and say, like, let me give you the 5 things about cybersecurity. Don't click that link. No Nigerian prince wants to give you money. It's useful though, because those of you who have ever done a phishing exercise and you realize that everyone falls for fish, and I mean everyone falls for fish. I've got time for one short story. At a recent one I did, the CISO had a sense of humor and said, I'm sick and tired of hearing that IT staff are smarter about fish than regular people. So I want you to do OSINT against the IT staff of our Fortune 100 company, and I want you to fish them. And I did. And it rained domain creds for a week. I tricked them into thinking that we were doing a phone rollout. We're going to give them, this will date me, the new iPhone 5 or the Galaxy Note 4, I think, a couple of years ago. And all they had to do was enter their domain creds in this form and select which phone they wanted. And it looked like, one of those bad clickbait, pop-up ads. And I got domain creds. And the sad part was, these were people who had like root on core systems. It's like, you gave it to me because you thought I was going to give you a phone. And none of them should be fired, but should be reminded, like, don't get arrogant when you think someone who has root on your boxes is not as greedy and, I'm not going to say lazy, but there's that instant, like, I have to do these 8 things, I'll do them all sloppily. But offer your time when you're doing, I'm trying to loop this back to, offer your time to people to remind them. Yes, you've heard this before, and I'm going to remind you again because after that fishing exercise, right, a week later, none of them fell for it. 6 months later, a few of them fell for it again. I mean, I changed it up, offered different phones. But, right, it's a reminder. Go to your church group, go to your youth group, go to whatever community that you call, that you care about, and to say, like, look, you're not going to talk about O-Day. You might start the story with some cool story you've done, about a pen test or tricking people or doing something awesome and neat, and then you say, but look, 80%, 90% of the good hits are done by people not doing the basics. And those five pointers are helpful to remind them. And if they see a face of someone that they know, right? You play you teach, you coach their softball league, or you do something, or you drink with them, or whatever you have in common. Like, oh, yeah, I saw that in an article on the web, but that you're saying this to me, it makes it more real. And you're building a bridge, but you're also kind of making the world a little bit more secure. So offer your time. Not saying you have to donate a lot of time, but it's half an hour. And you'll make friends outside of the community who have other interests. They may show you something. So that's my rant. Got a couple minutes for questions if you have any. Oh, I've put you all to sleep.
Everyone's being shy.
Yeah.
Did you have any, I guess remember the cursor cheat dodge vulnerability where the Uconnect was able to be hacked? Did you get any? I didn't really catch how much noise there was after that in the community because.
You mean about car hacking?
The question must be phrased as a question.
Well, no, is there a feedback to that? Sure. I know. After that, I have at least 3 friends that their practice is now almost exclusively car hacking. They can't talk about it because the NDA that General Motors signs in you it's pretty much backed up with, if you ever leak any of this, we'll bury you. But yes. Are there people testing this stuff? Yes. Is there a site somewhere in eastern Pennsylvania that's a Faraday cage the size of a garage to test this stuff? Oh yeah. So yes, that was effective outreach, right? We're going to do some stunt hacking, and all of a sudden all the auto manufacturers are like, huh, it would really be hard to sell cars with all this electronic stuff. Yeah.
Interested in liability for French speakers. Like with international law, especially like Eastern European countries, people might assume that their laws are going to get more strict as cybercrime causes like growing and growing. And at the same time, we have our organizations spreading internationally as well. So you might be a red team teamer for a U.S. company, but they have handful of hosts in a country where the laws are extremely strict about offensive tools. They give you their profile, their IP range, and next thing you know, you're breaking some laws or making it get extradited or something. Do you think there's a real risk there, or do you think the international operation this isn't there?
I think there is a minimal risk. May it increase? Yes. Usually a well-scoped thought out pen test scope. You know, that document says, these are the boxes I'm allowed to hit, these are the methods I'm going to have, and that kickoff meeting where you explain, if I see something that is crucial or I knock over something that was kind of important, I'm calling you rather than like putting it in my report. I think even in Mars restrictive nations, they're still going to recognize like you were covered by some kind of permission. Now, of course, that gets weirder if the further you are from that model of I have been retained by the owner of this system and I have granted permission. Like the case I'm thinking of is a friend and a client of mine, one Sam Bone, who basically Google dorked for a specific kind of malware that would offer up FTP. It was like Zizix or something. I'm spacing on what it was, but he Google dorked for it and found installs across the United States. And what he would do is he would then figure out where this box was, who owned it, and call them up and say, look, your system got owned by this piece of malware, and it's offering anonymous FTP of whatever's on that box. And the case he ran into was he found one at a health system in Louisiana. And their response was not the, oh, thanks for telling us. That's awesome. Instead it was, why did you hack our systems? And he's trying to explain, I didn't, I just saw it. And it took a few iterations to get to the, I saw your door open. Does that analogy work for you? I poked my head in to see whose house it was. But I didn't kick your door down. I didn't take your stuff. It was like that when I got here. Going back to liability, though, because I realize I've completely missed the question. I think there's a going back. It's a question of what were you doing and why were you doing it. And courts may find that the very structured, I'm a pen tester working for you, is different than what Sam did, which is different than, say, what Weave did. I think I've got time for one more question.
What do you think about Trump and the future of cyber?
I'm not 400 pounds yet. I think whoever won was irrelevant in this question. Cyber is important, right? Like, all of our commerce is done that way. We're in the news. He will say different things than Clinton would have, but either way, budgets are going to go up. We're going to get more focus. I think we're good. Thanks so much.
He can't figure out how to turn off his mic, but he can home your eyes. Anyway, just a couple quick announcements. Our next session, 10 o'clock.